In this episode, we're going to focus on how to plan penetration tests in a way that strengthens security without accidentally creating new risk, because a penetration test is a controlled attempt to find weaknesses, and control is the word that matters most. When people hear penetration testing, they often imagine dramatic hacking scenes. But in real organizations, the most dangerous part is not the testing itself. It is poorly planned testing that disrupts operations, violates boundaries, or produces unclear results that nobody can act on. Safe planning means defining exactly what is in scope and out of scope, agreeing on rules of engagement that protect the business, and ensuring reporting is clear enough to drive remediation. When those pieces are strong, penetration testing becomes a disciplined risk reduction exercise rather than a stressful surprise. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyber.Me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A penetration test is an authorized security assessment where testers attempt to identify and exploit weaknesses in order to demonstrate what could happen if a real attacker targeted the organization. The point is not to embarrass anyone or prove that the testers are clever. The point is to produce evidence about exposure, validate controls, and generate concrete findings that can be fixed. Because this activity involves intentionally probing systems, it must be planned with the same seriousness as any other high-impact operational change. A test without strong boundaries can cause outages, corrupt data, trigger false alarms, or create legal and reputational issues if the testing crosses into systems that were not authorized. Planning is what turns testing from uncontrolled hacking into a safe, structured assessment. Scope control is the first pillar of safe planning, and it begins with clarity about what systems, networks, applications, and data are included in the test. A strong scope definition is detailed enough that both the organization and the testers can point to it and agree, without guesswork, what is allowed. Scope includes not only the targets, but also the types of testing allowed, the time windows for activity, and the environments involved, such as production or non-production. It also includes explicit exclusions, because out-of-scope boundaries are often where trouble begins. For example, if certain systems are mission-critical or safety-related, they may be excluded or handled with special precautions. Scope control prevents accidental harm and ensures that test results are relevant to the assets the organization actually cares about. A crucial beginner idea is that scope should match business priorities rather than being chosen simply because systems are easy to scan. If the organization is most worried about customer-facing services, then the test should focus there, because weaknesses in internal low-impact systems may not represent the most important risk. On the other hand, internal systems can still be important if compromise would lead to privilege escalation or access to sensitive data. The scope decision is therefore a risk decision, and it should be made deliberately with input from both security and business stakeholders. When scope is aligned with risk, the test produces findings that matter, and the organization is more likely to invest in fixing them. Rules of engagement define how the test will be conducted, and they exist to protect both the organization and the testers. Rules of engagement cover practical constraints such as permitted hours for intrusive testing, which techniques are allowed or prohibited, and how testers must identify themselves when interacting with staff. They also cover safety controls, such as avoiding actions that could destroy data, disrupt critical services, or impact customer operations. For example, a rule might limit the use of certain high-impact techniques on production systems, or require that specific sensitive data not be accessed even if it is technically reachable. These rules are not about making the test less valuable. They are about ensuring the value gained does not come at an unacceptable cost. Coordination and communication protocols are an important part of rules of engagement, because a penetration test intersects with incident detection and response processes. If defenders see suspicious activity and treat it like a real attack, they may take containment actions that disrupt business or interfere with testing. Safe planning, therefore, includes agreements about who knows the test is happening, how the test will be identified internally, and what the emergency stop procedure is if something goes wrong. Some organizations choose to limit who is informed to preserve realism, while others prioritize operational clarity to avoid confusion. The correct choice depends on goals and maturity, but the key is that the decision is intentional and documented rather than improvised. Legal authorization is another essential aspect of safe planning, even though it may not feel technical. A penetration test must be explicitly authorized by the organization that owns or controls the systems being tested, and that authorization should be documented clearly. Without clear authorization, even well-intentioned testing can be interpreted as unauthorized access, which creates legal and ethical risk. Authorization is also important for third-party systems. If a service is hosted by a provider, the organization may need to ensure that testing is allowed under provider terms. Safe planning includes verifying that permission extends to all systems in scope and that testing will not violate contractual obligations. Testing in production environments requires particular caution because the stakes are higher. A vulnerability scan or exploit attempt can stress systems, consume resources, or trigger protective controls in ways that affect customers. Safe planning, therefore, involves selecting time windows that reduce impact and ensuring monitoring is in place to detect unintended disruption quickly. It may also involve using less aggressive techniques or focusing on validation rather than full exploitation for certain systems. The goal is to gather meaningful evidence without creating outages. This balance is part of professional testing discipline. Reporting clarity is the third pillar, and it determines whether the penetration test produces real improvement or becomes a confusing document that gets filed away. A clear report explains what was tested, what was found, and why it matters in terms the organization can act on. It should distinguish between observations, confirmed weaknesses, and demonstrated impact. It should also explain exploit paths in a way that helps defenders understand how an attacker could move from one weakness to another. The report should avoid vague claims that cannot be validated, because vague findings are easy to ignore. Clarity makes remediation more likely because it reduces debate about what the finding means and what to do next. A strong report also connects findings to risk and prioritization. Not all vulnerabilities carry the same urgency, and organizations need guidance about what to address first. Reporting should explain exposure, potential impact, and exploitability in a way that supports decision-making. It should also include evidence that findings were confirmed, such as logs or proof of access gained, without revealing sensitive details that could be misused. When reports provide clear evidence and clear prioritization guidance, remediation becomes more structured and less political. The report becomes a tool for improvement rather than a source of anxiety. Another part of reporting clarity is documenting limitations and assumptions. No penetration test can prove the absence of vulnerabilities because tests are bounded by scope, time, and methods. A report should explain those boundaries so stakeholders do not misinterpret results. For example, if certain systems were excluded or if certain techniques were prohibited for safety reasons, the report should state that clearly. This transparency prevents false confidence and helps plan future assessments. Clarity about limitations is not weakness. It is professional honesty that improves risk understanding. Finally, safe planning includes thinking about what happens after the report, because testing without follow-through does not reduce risk. The organization should have a plan for triaging findings, assigning ownership, tracking remediation, and validating closure through retesting where appropriate. While the penetration test itself is time-boxed, the value comes from the remediation cycle it triggers. Planning should therefore include alignment on how results will be handled, how quickly critical findings must be addressed, and how communication about progress will occur. This ensures the test leads to measurable improvement rather than becoming a one-time event. To conclude, planning penetration tests safely means turning a potentially disruptive activity into a controlled, high-value assessment. Scope control keeps testing aligned with business priorities and prevents accidental boundary violations. Rules of engagement protect operations by defining safe methods, communication protocols, and stop procedures while ensuring authorization is clear. Reporting clarity transforms test activity into actionable outcomes by providing evidence, prioritization, and transparent limitations. When these three pillars are handled with discipline, penetration testing becomes a structured way to validate defenses and guide remediation, producing real security improvement without introducing unnecessary risk.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.